Throughout the history of television and film, there have been many pieces of media that seek to examine and address fascism head on. Sci fi, in particular, has been an avenue for discussing social issues, with shows like Star Trek often being on the forefront. However, unlike Star Trek, where the humans and Earth are pretty much always the good guys, and they live in something of a utopia, Babylon 5 sees a world in which humans are still very flawed, having never solved many of the fundamental systemic issues like homelessness and poverty. Yet they are still looking towards the stars and bringing with them the problems of the past. What exactly is fascism? So, Babylon 5 is a somewhat slow paced show. A lot of the things leading up to major events are spread out, and a lot of the time, any one thing can be hard to pinpoint as immediately fascist until maybe around mid season 2 or early into season 3. When President Santiago is assassinated at the end of season 1 by his then vice president Clark, Clark gets installed as president and slowly over the course of the next 2 seasons starts implementing more and more fascist policies. In Umberto Eco's essay Fascism, he writes out a list of recurring traits and commonalities among fascist regimes. His list includes, among other things, fear of criticism, fear of difference, and nationalism. The list includes 14 items, but these are the 3 I feel are most relevant, particularly for the 2 episodes that I have in mind to talk about, Point of No Return and The Illusion of Truth. These, in my mind, are 2 very pivotal episodes, and they showcase a lot of the fascism present within EarthGov and how Babylon 5 deals with it. Point of No Return, Season 3, Episode 9. So for some background, Earth under Clark is becoming more and more nationalistic and fascist every day. In this episode, Nightwatch is given control of Babylon 5 following Clark's order of martial law. Remaining security officers who don't choose to join Nightwatch are forced to resign. It is a fascist favorite trope, this enemy of the people, used intentionally by Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Nightwatch has been around since mid-season 2. They are essentially a paramilitary organization filled with xenophobic humans. They appeal to the nationalistic pride of many of the officers aboard Babylon 5 and encourage them to report on anyone who criticizes the Earth Alliance or who hangs out with aliens in their free time. This culminates in people who have done nothing wrong being accused of sedition. Countless fascist regimes have identified a scapegoat for all of the problems in their society. Earth under President Clark is no exception. They use the manufactured threat of alien collusion to drive their citizens' sense of nationalism. However, despite this, in this episode, we see that the leadership of Babylon 5 sees Clark's regime for what it is and recognizes the need to stand up against it. Babylon 5 created an environment that was an inherent anathema to the budding fascist tendencies taking root on Earth. Culturally, spiritually, and ethnically diverse, a firewall to the emboldened, racist, and xenophobic characters taking over the government back home. Sheridan and his crew are part of Earth Force, but they are also diplomats. They work with aliens every day, and they have personal friendships and connections with them, and don't view them as the existential threat that EarthGov has made them out to be. This episode sees Nightwatch increase in its militancy by a lot, wielding batons and breaking up small gatherings in the Zocalo. ISN shows a broadcast of General Haig escaping Clark's ships, and people are crowded around watching and cheering as Haig is the leader of a growing resistance movement against Clark's fascist regime. Nightwatch claims the crowd is inciting a riot and insists they break up and leave. This, of course, incites a riot. The central paradox of fascism. It was a mechanism for common people to politically assert themselves, and yet, the people who used fascism largely did so to repress the political assertions of other common people. At its core, fascism was participatory anti-democracy. Anyone who dares to question the authority of EarthGov is essentially thought of as the enemy. Organizations like Nightwatch exist under the guise of making people feel like they are part of something special, but really they only exist to protect the fascist regime's own interests. Put simply, any power structure that does not stand being criticized is not doing its job and wants to shift the blame. This is why they create propaganda, this is why they use scapegoats, and this is why they outlaw speaking out against them. In reality, they fear what Haig's escape implies for the continued existence of Clark's regime, and they fear dissent as criticism presents a danger to the continued existence of fascism. At the climax of this episode, when Sheridan and his crew trap Nightwatch in the docking bay and arrest them, they know that Clark will come after them for this. They simply didn't have any other options. They have seen past the propaganda, and they realize that they have to do everything in their power to stop fascism, at all costs. This is especially true of Zach Allen, who's been in the Night Watch for the past several episodes, seemingly kind of on the fence, hearing all the propaganda firsthand, but clearly second-guessing it. He makes his move against them in this episode, which helps Sheridan trap and arrest them. As this episode title and the title of the season, Point of No Return, suggests, that is what this episode is. For Zach, for Sheridan, for Babylon 5, and for the future of peace between Babylon 5 and Earth. Even though the Earth Alliance Civil War didn't start until around mid-season 4, partially due to the Shadow War, we can feel it bubbling up to the surface in this episode, with the way that Nightwatch is escalating its actions, and with the way that the president so easily disregards democracy, declaring martial law and dissolving the Senate, and employing paramilitary units that are essentially just thought crime police. The other episode that I want to talk about is The Illusion of Truth, Season 4, Episode 8. This episode is really interesting because there was already a news report episode previously in the show. Season 2, Episode 15, And Now for a Word. That episode was something of a mockumentary-style news report on Babylon 5, and watching this episode, you will be forgiven for thinking that this might end up being similar. At this point, the Shadow War has ended, and several Earth colonies, along with Babylon 5, have declared independence from EarthGov. And EarthGov has largely failed at trying to gain control of them, beyond just labeling them as terrorists. After Clark-loyal ships are unsuccessful in their standoff against Babylon 5 due to Delen's fleet of Minbari warships, EarthGov decides to go a different route. Since Clark's government now controls ISN, the Interstellar News Network, they decided to just go ahead with propaganda instead, to discredit Babylon 5. The direction in this episode is incredible, from the way certain moments are cut together, to the way that audio is taken out and replaced with narration. Lanier is instructed by Sheridan to give a tour to ISN reporter Dan Randall, and while he's giving a tour of Down Below, footage of Babylon 5's homeless population is given a voiceover about how humans are forced to live in filth and the good quarters are reserved for high-ranking aliens. Footage of doctors running down the hall with someone in critical condition is said to be people being sedated for protesting their conditions. Randall claims that the alien governments on board Babylon 5 are calling the shots, and uses footage of Londo arguing with Sheridan as evidence of this. As an audience, you almost can't help but think that you could never be fooled by such an obvious piece of propaganda, but at the same time, it feels weirdly grounded in reality. Propaganda has long been a tool for fascism, particularly in trying to promote the idea of the enemy. In this case, the enemy being aliens and the threat of invasion. These threats, whether real or imagined, were often presented as existential and also as ones that were often ignored, not understood, or promoted by wider society. Now, a key aspect to this propaganda film is the relationship between John Sheridan and Delenn. As he is human and she is Minbari, this is something of a controversial relationship, and it makes for an excellent addition to the hit piece. And Clark's regime has already put in place the idea of aliens as a threat to Earth. So Randall sits down and interviews Sheridan and Delenn, and later edits the interview to twist their love as being the reason for Sheridan betraying his people. He even goes so far as to bring on a psychologist who talks about something called Minbari War Syndrome, saying that Sheridan has an inferiority complex about aliens, and that is what caused him to turn against his own race. Randall even implies that Babylon 5 is planning to attack Earth with the Minbari fleet. The way that this propaganda piece demonizes aliens is indicative of the fascism of the Clark regime. One thing I find interesting about it is that throughout a lot of it, it's not particularly disguised very well. Like, the editing is a lot more lazy during the interview section, and there are a lot of obvious cuts and spliced questions, implying to me a certain amount of realization that with enough fear-mongering about aliens, people will simply overlook it. At the end of the episode, when it cuts back to Sheridan, Ivanova, and Delenn, it's quite clear that the propaganda piece has caused a lot more damage than they ever thought that it could. This episode is a turning point as far as the depths that EarthGov is willing to go to discredit Babylon 5. It directly leads to Ivanova creating the Stellarcast voice of the resistance to combat Earth's propaganda. Babylon 5 showcases the evils of fascism through the lens of sci-fi and shows us the ways that fascist ideology can slowly permeate into society when left unchallenged. Night Watch is a prime example of this. We see so many scenes of Zack questioning things and starting to come to terms with how bad it all is, but nobody else in the group ever seems to question anything. They're all so blinded with nationalism and the propaganda being spread. In these episodes, and in the show as a whole, we see the effects of fascism on society, and in episodes like Point of No Return in particular, we see how important it is to stand up against fascism.